Life, as we experience it, often feels like a stage where we are compelled to play roles with utmost seriousness. We chase careers, status, recognition, and even meaning itself as though everything depended upon our perfect performance. Yet the irony, as Alan Watts once observed, is that the harder we cling to control, the more the game of life slips from our hands. Watts would remind us, the universe is not a machine demanding seriousness, but a dance asking for participation. To live well is not to grip every detail with tension, but to move with the rhythm of existence. At the same time, Agnes Callard, a philosopher of our age, warns us that the invitation to let go is not the same as abandoning our aspirations. We are creatures of longing, forever reaching toward goals not yet within our grasp. Our seriousness should not be the heavy burden of fear, but the playful seriousness of someone learning, aspiring, and growing. To take life too seriously is to smother its mystery, but to refuse seriousness altogether is to fall into apathy. Between Alan Watts's laughter and Agnes Callard's Socratic questioning lies a balance, one in which life becomes both a dance and a dialogue. In today's exploration, we'll step into this balance. We'll unfold the wisdom of Watts, who insists that the meaning of life is not found in clinging to it, but in flowing with it. We'll weave his vision together with Callard's understanding of human desire, not as a flaw but as the very engine of becoming. Together, their voices offer us a path, a way to live without the crushing weight of seriousness, yet still with the flame of aspiration. So let us begin this journey, not with the grim determination of soldiers marching into battle, but with the openness of dancers stepping onto the floor, guided by music that is both ancient and ever new. Part 1. The problem of taking life too seriously. Alan Watts often warned us that one of the greatest mistakes we make is to treat life as though it were a problem to be solved, rather than a mystery to be experienced. When we take life too seriously, we begin to imagine that there is a final scorecard waiting for us at the end. Every decision feels like a test, every mistake like a fatal blow. We turn what should be a symphony into an examination, and in doing so, we lose the music altogether. The tragedy of this seriousness is that it breeds anxiety. It convinces us that our worth is always in question, always under review. Imagine a child learning to walk. If that child took each stumble as proof of failure, if they judged themselves harshly for every fall, they would never learn to walk at all. Yet as adults, this is exactly what we do. We magnify our stumbles. We make them evidence of inadequacy. We tell ourselves that life will punish us for imperfection. Alan Watts would laugh at this. He would say, "The very fact that you stumble is proof that you are alive, that you are playing the game." Life is not about walking flawlessly, but about moving, falling, rising, and laughing at the rhythm of it all. He compared it to music. You don't listen to a song just to reach the final note. You listen to enjoy every bar, every phrase, every moment of melody. If the value of music were only its ending, then Beethoven's symphonies would collapse into a single crashing chord. Instead, the beauty is in the unfolding. And yet, Agnes Callard reminds us the mistake is not only in taking life too seriously, but also in thinking we can simply shrug seriousness off. Desire pulls at us. Aspiration calls us forward. To live as human beings is to want, to long, to aim for things beyond our current selves. If Watts shows us the danger of over-seriousness, Callard reveals why seriousness keeps returning. Because to aspire is to care. We are not butterflies drifting without purpose. We are beings whose lives are structured by goals. The question then is not whether to care, but how to care without being crushed by the weight of caring. Part of the problem is cultural. We are told that life is a race. Get the degree, land the job, buy the house, secure the status. Every milestone becomes another reason to take life with tense seriousness. Success becomes less about living well and more about outpacing others. Watts exposes the absurdity of this. If life were really about winning a race, then the point of living would be to reach death as quickly as possible. Yet no one wants that, which means the metaphor was wrong from the start. Callard reframes the issue. Aspiration is not a race but a conversation with the self. When you aim to learn philosophy, for instance, you don't merely want to know the facts, you want to transform who you are. You want to become the kind of person who understands, who thinks more deeply, who sees the world differently. Seriousness here should not be a crushing burden, but a hopeful tension, a reaching toward what you are not yet but might become. Thus, part 1 leaves us with a paradox. We must care deeply but not too seriously. We must aspire but not suffocate under aspiration. We must play the game without forgetting that it is, after all, a game. Part 2. The playful wisdom of letting go. If life is a game, as Watts insisted, then what does it mean to play well? The first step, he says, is to realize that clinging spoils the play. The moment you try to hold on to life too tightly, it slips through your fingers like water. Think of laughter. You cannot force yourself to laugh genuinely. The harder you try, the less it works. Laughter arises when you loosen your grip, when you allow the absurdity of things to flow into you. Watts believed life itself works the same way joy comes, not from squeezing but from opening. The Buddhist traditions that influenced Watts often spoke of grasping as the root of suffering. When you cling to permanence in a world that is impermanent, you guarantee disappointment. Taking life too seriously often means clinging to plans, to identities, to the illusion of control. Watts would remind us that clouds drift, rivers flow, and we too must learn to move rather than to grasp. But Callard complicates the picture. She agrees that clinging suffocates us, yet she insists that letting go cannot mean indifference. Imagine a student who shrugs at every mistake, who treats learning as meaningless. That student does not grow. They drift. Aspiration requires a kind of seriousness, but not the crushing seriousness Watts warned against. Rather, a playful seriousness, like an actor stepping into a role. The actor knows it is play, yet the performance matters. Without caring, the play collapses. This is the wisdom of balance. Watts offers us freedom from suffocating seriousness. Callard offers us the reminder that without seriousness we lose direction. Between them, we find a middle way, to take life seriously enough to aspire, but lightly enough to laugh. To care deeply about becoming more than we are, but to carry that care with a sense of play. Consider friendship. If you treat friendships with cold detachment, they wither. But if you take them with too much seriousness, demanding perfection, fearing loss at every turn, you suffocate the very bond you want to protect. The healthiest friendships are those where seriousness and play coexist. You show up when it matters, but you laugh often, you forgive freely, you let the relationship breathe. Life in its entirety asks the same of us. By the end of part 2, the message becomes clear. Don't take life too seriously, for seriousness without play leads to despair. But don't dismiss seriousness altogether, for without it, aspiration dies. Between Watts's cosmic laughter and Callard's patient questioning lies a wisdom we desperately need in an age of anxiety. Part 3. The illusion of control. One of the greatest sources of unnecessary seriousness is our obsession with control. We imagine that if we could only plan perfectly, calculate every risk and predict every outcome, then life would finally become safe. Alan Watts dismantled this illusion with a kind of gentle mischief. He said, to seek total control is like trying to iron waves flat on the ocean. The moment you smooth one ripple, another arises. The sea cannot be tamed into stillness without ceasing to be the sea. This illusion of control shows up in subtle ways. We plan conversations before they happen, scripting what we will say and what others will say in response. We rehearse imaginary disasters, trying to armor ourselves against every possibility. We even attempt to control our emotions, commanding ourselves never to feel jealousy, anger, or sadness. And yet life continues to move in directions we did not foresee. The call we dreaded never comes. The job we thought was secure vanishes. The friend we counted on drifts away. The more tightly we grip the wheel, the more we realize it was never connected to the road. Watts would laugh at this futility, not to mock us, but to free us. He compared life to sailing rather than driving. A sailor does not command the ocean. They learn to adjust the sails, to read the winds, to move with forces greater than themselves. Control in the absolute sense is an illusion, but skillful navigation is real. To take life too seriously is to believe you can dictate the winds. To take it lightly but wisely is to learn how to set the sail. Agnes Callard complicates this picture with her insight into aspiration. For her, the attempt to control everything is not merely an error, but a betrayal of growth. Why? Because aspiration requires surrender. To aspire to learn music, philosophy, or love itself is to acknowledge that you do not yet know what you are reaching toward. You cannot fully script the journey because you cannot yet imagine what it means to be transformed. If control were possible, aspiration would vanish, for growth means stepping into the unknown. Thus, seriousness rooted in control is misguided. True seriousness is not about eliminating risk, but about being willing to risk transformation. Watts tells us to laugh at the illusion of mastery, while Callard tells us to walk forward into the unknown with courage. Together they guide us toward a paradoxical freedom. You grow most when you release the need to grip everything, and you live best when you realize that control was never the point. Part 4. The burden of identity. Another reason we take life too seriously is because of the stories we tell about ourselves. From an early age, we are told to answer the question, "Who are you?" We build identities around our jobs, our roles, our achievements, our reputations. But once we craft these masks, we begin to fear any crack in them. A student fears failure not only because of a grade, but because of what it says about their identity. Am I smart? A worker fears being laid off not only for the loss of income, but because it challenges their story. Am I successful? Alan Watts often exposed the absurdity of clinging to rigid identities. He argued that the self is not a fixed object, but a flowing process, more like a river than a stone. When you insist on being something definite once and for all, you are like a river demanding to remain frozen forever. Life's flow becomes frightening because you refuse to admit that you were never frozen to begin with. Watts would say you are not a noun, you are a verb, a living, moving, changing process. Taking life too seriously often means treating yourself as a permanent monument when in fact you are a dance of change. Yet Callard invites us to reconsider. If identity is fluid, then why do we feel such urgency to defend it? Her answer lies in aspiration. We hold tightly to identities because we sense that who we are is always unfinished. We are becoming someone, and that becoming feels fragile. The student cares so much about being smart because they want to become wiser. The worker clings to success because they long for recognition and stability. These identities are not lies, but stepping stones. To cling to them is to freeze growth, but to dismiss them altogether is to deny aspiration. Thus, the burden of identity is not solved by erasing all labels. It is solved by holding them lightly. You can call yourself a student, but remember that being a student is about learning, not about defending a title. You can call yourself a parent, but remember that parenthood is a practice of love, not a badge to polish. You can call yourself a philosopher, but remember that philosophy is not about appearing wise, but about asking questions that make you humble. Watts and Callard, when brought together, teach us this. Don't take your identity too seriously, because you are not yet finished. But don't abandon identity altogether, because it points toward the very horizon of who you hope to become. The trick is to see your labels as guides, not prisons, to use them as pathways toward growth rather than cages that suffocate it. Part 5. Time, urgency, and the fear of missing out. Perhaps nowhere does seriousness grip us more tightly than in our relationship with time. We hurry through life, haunted by the thought that time is running out. We measure our worth by how much we have achieved by certain ages, comparing ourselves to peers, panicking if we fall behind. The phrase fear of missing out captures it well, the sense that life is a limited buffet, and if we do not pile our plate high enough, we will go hungry. Alan Watts dismantled this obsession by showing that our concept of time itself is distorted. He argued that time is not a line racing toward the future, but a perpetual present, unfolding endlessly. When you take life too seriously, you live as though you are always rehearsing for some final performance that never arrives. You postpone joy, saying, "I'll relax when I succeed, when I retire, when I prove myself." But Watts reminds us there is no final act waiting. The present moment is the performance itself. To live well is to see that life is not preparing for something else, it is happening now. Callard enters with a necessary correction. Aspiration requires time. Growth unfolds across years, and the very fact that we are unfinished means we cannot collapse everything into the present. To aspire is to live in tension between who you are and who you might become. That tension creates urgency, but urgency does not have to be panic. Urgency can be the energy of care. The problem is not that we use time to aspire. The problem is that we weaponize time against ourselves. We tell ourselves, if I haven't achieved X by 30 or Y by 40, then I am worthless. This is not aspiration but tyranny. The healthier perspective is to see time as a landscape, not a stopwatch. You are not racing against others. You are walking your own path of transformation. If Watts teaches us to release the panic of deadlines, Callard teaches us to respect the patient unfolding of growth. Life is not about cramming every experience before the curtain falls, nor is it about drifting without purpose. It is about walking with both presence and aspiration, enjoying the scenery of each step, while still moving forward toward horizons not yet reached. Together they remind us, don't take time too seriously, for it will paralyze you. But don't treat time as irrelevant, for it is the medium in which you become yourself. Time is not your enemy. It is your partner in the dance of becoming. Part 6. Success, Failure, and the Weight of Comparison. If there is one thing that drives us to take life too seriously, it is the constant comparison to others. We measure ourselves against peers, against social media images, against ideals whispered to us by culture. Success becomes not simply about living well, but about winning a contest we never chose to enter. Failure becomes not just a setback, but a mark of shame. In this atmosphere, every action feels unbearably heavy, as though the entire meaning of our existence is always at stake. Alan Watts unravels this illusion by pointing out that success and failure are not opposites but parts of the same game. He would say, imagine a dance in which no one ever stumbled, no rhythm was ever broken. Such perfection would make the dance mechanical and lifeless. It is precisely the slips, the improvisations, and the recoveries that make it beautiful. Similarly, success without failure would be meaningless, like a story without conflict, or a song without tension. Taking life too seriously means forgetting that failure is not the end, but the texture of the play. Agnes Callard deepens this by showing how aspiration changes our relationship to failure. To aspire is to aim at something you do not yet understand, which means mistakes are inevitable. When you learn a language, you will mispronounce words. When you learn to love, you will misunderstand your partner. When you learn philosophy, you will make arguments that later seem foolish. But Callard reminds us, these mistakes are not evidence against you. They are proof that you are growing. Failure is the shadow cast by aspiration's light. The burden of comparison, then, is doubly misguided. First, because Watts would tell us that life is not a competition to be won. Second, because Callard would tell us that your growth cannot be measured by anyone else's path. To aspire is to become a new person, and no one else can dictate the timeline of your transformation. The seriousness of comparison is false. Seriousness, it locks you into a cage of borrowed standards. True seriousness is caring enough to walk your own path, even if it looks slower, stranger, or less glamorous than others. When we release the weight of comparison, we can see success and failure for what they truly are, not verdicts on our worth, but movements in the ongoing dance of becoming. Part 7. The Joy of Aspiration and the Lightness of Being. By now, a picture begins to emerge. Alan Watts urging us not to take life as a burden of grim seriousness, and Agnes Callard urging us not to abandon seriousness altogether. Their dialogue suggests that life is best lived when we carry aspiration with lightness, when we learn to dance with the tension between who we are and who we want to become. Watts once said that the meaning of life is to be alive, not to chase after meaning as though it were hidden behind some curtain, but to realize that the sheer act of being is already profound. This insight lightens the load. You do not have to justify your existence with constant proof of productivity or worth. You are already part of the cosmic play, already a note in the grand symphony. To take life too seriously is to forget that simply being is enough. Callard, however, reminds us that to be human is to reach beyond enough. We aspire not because we are empty, but because we are alive with desire. A child who learns to speak, an artist who learns to paint, a seeker who learns philosophy, all are moved by aspirations that reshape their very selves. To live lightly is not to abandon aspiration, but to embrace it joyfully, without turning it into a crushing demand. Think of it this way. You are not climbing a mountain with a heavy pack of seriousness. You are exploring a landscape with curiosity. Each step changes you. Each vista opens a new horizon. There is effort, yes, but it is effort carried with wonder rather than fear. Watts gives us laughter to dissolve the panic of control. Callard gives us aspiration to keep us moving forward. Together they show us how to live with both joy and direction. Playful, yet purposeful. When you combine these perspectives, you discover that the highest form of seriousness is actually indistinguishable from play. The musician practicing scales, the philosopher wrestling with questions, the lover learning to trust, all are serious. But their seriousness is light, like a flame that illuminates rather than a stone that crushes. This is the art of life. To aspire deeply and yet to laugh often. To care with intensity but to carry that care lightly. Ending, living between laughter and aspiration. So what does it mean in the end? Not to take life too seriously. It does not mean carelessness. It does not mean indifference. It means seeing life as a dance rather than a trial, a dialogue rather than a verdict. It means learning to laugh at the illusion of control, while still aspiring to become more than you are. Alan Watts gives us the freedom of laughter, the wisdom of letting go, the reminder that we are not machines grinding toward some fixed purpose, but living beings flowing like rivers and singing like music. Agnes Callard gives us the dignity of aspiration, the recognition that we are always becoming, always reaching towards something beyond our current selves. When these voices meet, they reveal a way of living that is neither suffocated by seriousness nor emptied by apathy. It is a life where you can stumble without shame, grow without panic, and aspire without being crushed by comparison. It is a life where you can carry your desires as gifts rather than burdens, and where even failure becomes part of the unfolding beauty of your path. So as you step back into your own life after this reflection, remember, you do not need to win life, control it, or prove yourself worthy of it. You only need to play it, with care, with laughter, with aspiration, with love. Smile at the absurdities, embrace the uncertainties. Aspire toward the horizons that call you, but carry that aspiration with joy rather than fear. For in the end, the wisest way to live is not to take life too seriously. Instead, live between Watts's cosmic laughter and Callard's Socratic questioning. Live in the dance, live in the dialogue, live as if every moment were both serious and playful, fragile and infinite.